you say you agree with Rand about what sex can be, but you don't limit yourself to that. And you don't think that if someone has sex outside of love that it means that he's insecure. Now, here's another point where we run into some trouble, because I think she hits a little bit of hyperbole here. She does say, only the man who extols the purity of a love devoid of desire is capable of the depravity of a desire devoid of love. Now, I think that in the full context of her writings, this was an attempt to, again, put a point very strongly in order to make sure that the point gets across. And as an example, let's look at Hank Rearden and Dagny Taggart. They never once say "I love you" to each other, except Hank Rearden says "I love you" to her right before he tells her that "I know you found somebody else, and that's fine by me, I understand." So throughout their entire passionate affair, they never bring up the subject of love. And when Dagny ran the John Galt line, there was a moment where she was slumped over on the desk, and she felt a moment of sexual desire, and she reflected on the fact that she had nobody to share it with. So these are all examples of this desire arising out of a generalized love for life, and but not in response necessarily to a person that they are in love with. And before Rearden and Dagny got together, he still felt sexual urges, and Rand writes that when they got so strong he couldn't resist them anymore, he went ahead and released them with his wife, and he hated it. He hated having to express his sexual energy that way. But yet he did, and he wasn't presented as an evil person for having done so, and nor should he have been. I think that part of the problem is taking some of the sentences that she says and taking them, I hate to say taking them out of context, because that's such a weaselly way of getting out of things. I mean, people say, "Oh, well, you took me out of context," when they just want to, get rid of the consequences of having said what they said. But one thing about Ayn Rand's writing is that she often has said that you have to take all of her writing into account. For example, she has said that if you take Dominique literally, she is very stupid. You can't think of her as, the kind of person. You have to think of her as an abstraction, kind of like as a walking abstraction. You can't take her absolutely literally. And I think that's the case with some of the things that she said about sex, because in the wider context, if you look at what her characters actually do, and apparently with how she reacted to Leonard's having a new girlfriend, I would say that in the full context of things, she is not an absolutist when it comes to having sex only with someone that you're in love with. So she's not saying that sexual desire can only be a response to someone that you're in love with, but she is saying that the decision to engage that desire with a particular person brings out all kinds of value judgments, and that a person's fundamental values are what guide their choice in sexual partner. She says, "Show me what a man finds sexually attractive, and I will tell you his entire philosophy of life." Maybe a little bit of hyperbole there, but by and large that is absolutely true. You can tell a lot about a person's hierarchy of values by looking at their sexual choices. Maybe not their fantasies necessarily, but by the actual people they do choose. You make an analogy about going to a masseuse and getting a back rub, and that getting a back rub does not necessarily mean that you feel affection for the masseuse who is giving you the back rub. And you use that as an analogy for sex. So I think your example about going to a masseuse actually makes my point. We agree that there's nothing wrong with going to a masseuse, that it has nothing to do with affection on the part of either the person getting or the person receiving the massage. But the correlate of a masseuse with regards to sex is a prostitute. Now, no one would really object to their significant other going to a masseuse, but of course they're going to object to them going to a prostitute. So to use a masseuse as an analogy for sex is, I think it ignores the fundamental difference between getting a back rub and getting sex. I mean, there's such a huge difference between the two that I don't think that analogy really works. Let's see, I think one last point. You say that a lot of what she says about sex might be true, but if it is true, then she hasn't proved it, and if it is true, then she just got lucky. Well, I can say that in my experience, I have found that what she says about sex and the psychology involved is absolutely true. This is the kind of thing that can't be deduced from first principles. It's something that has to be induced from experience. In a way, she's saying, you know, take a look over here. When these things go together, they have this effect. And if the person says, I don't see that, she can try to point that out from a different angle, or she can ask you to look a little bit closer, but ultimately, and not just through taking someone else's say-so. To sum up, she is not saying that sexual desire without love is depraved. She is saying that how we act on that desire can tell us a lot about our hierarchy of values. So I have a couple of caveats, though. One is that both Ayn Rand and I are female, and there may simply be a different perspective from the female point of view than from the male point of view. I don't know if that's true and to what extent it is true, if it is. But that's just one thought to throw out there. Another one is that age may be a function. If someone is a teenager and they're, you know, caught up in all the hormones and everything, I couldn't imagine that they would have the same perspective on sex as someone who is a bit older. So now, of course, the truth of the situation is not going to change, but the difference would be that probably the younger a person is, the harder it's going to be for them to see this. So if you have a response, I'll be happy to hear it. Good video, and I enjoyed making this one. So I'll be happy to hear from you. See you later.